Spider-Man has come out now, and I feel like it's finally okay for me to talk about. I've purposely left this review a week so people had time to watch it before I went ahead and talked about it further. But that just goes without saying. If you haven't seen the film yet or care about spoilers, I will be talking about spoilers in this video as I'll be going through the whole film and what I did and didn't like about it, and what this means for LEGO, as I feel like they've got a fair few things to make decisions on now. First thing I want to say about this movie though is that unsurprisingly I loved it. Almost more than I thought I would have. Now that's not to say that it doesn't have its problems, because it does, and we'll get into that, but in my opinion all the decisions made in Tom Holland's rendition of the Spider-Man character have been great, and the decision making of this film really does solidify the decisions they've made in the previous films, showing that even though this version of Spider-Man is definitely different from other renditions, he is still his own Spider-Man and deserves that mantle just as much as his other predecessors, Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire. So let's jump into this. The first thing I'm going to mention during this review are the things I didn't like about the film, because most of them do happen around the beginning half of the film. The film does pick up exactly where we left off from Far From Home, with Mysterio releasing the footage about who Spider-Man is, and we go through a sequence of great shots explaining a little bit more about how Tony Stark's drones have been deactivated, so Edith from the previous film is now offline, how Peter is dealing with the accusations that he's killed Mysterio, and even public opinion is changing on the whole Spider-Man name. And all throughout this montage, a wonderful voiceover from J.K. Simmons, J. Jonah Jameson, brought back to reprise his role, and although I would have loved to see him do more in this film, I did love all of the scenes that he was in. And here's honestly the best and worst part about this film for me. After this excellent opener to the film, we immediately see Matt Murdock, and he slows the pacing right down by basically saying that he has cleared Peter of all charges. And when I first saw this in the cinema, I reacted the same as everybody else by saying finally they acknowledged the MCU Netflix series, meaning hopefully we can get some more cameos in the future. But then I thought about it a little bit more, and I actually hate this scene. And I'm really glad that Matt Murdock has been put into the MCU officially, and is still once again played by Charlie Cox, but I would have loved to see Peter on trial, or against government officials that want to put him away for killing Mysterio. I'm not 100% how your justice system works over in America, but I would have loved to see Peter actually have to make conversation about killing Mysterio, and Charlie Cox defending him, like in an episode of the first season of Daredevil where he was defending someone for killing in self-defense.
These questions of good and evil, as important as they are, have no place in a court of law. Only the facts matter. My client claims he acted in self-defense. The only other witness, a frightened young woman, has stated that my client was pleasant and friendly, and that she only saw the struggle after it had started. Those are the facts. Based on these, and these alone, the prosecution has failed to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that my client was not acting solely in self-defense, and those, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, are the facts.
This way we could have led from the joke of "you need a lawyer," jump cut straight into this type of a scene, and then we could have had a slow reveal that Matt Murdock was finally getting introduced in this series as Peter's defense attorney. This could have led to Matt Murdock winning the case, showing the audience that haven't watched the Netflix series that Matt Murdock is a very good lawyer, would have dropped the Mysterio killing charges, but also would have kept the public opinion in the wrong for people who liked Mysterio. And then going into the same scene that we got from the film, where they were gathered around the table and a brick comes flying through the window. And it's upsetting to me that that 5 minutes of extra runtime could have potentially been a much better scene for the introduction of Matt Murdock into the MCU. And it also fixes the problem I have with the opening of this film, which is the Mysterio stuff and the alleged killing of him, which they kind of seem to brush under the rug. I mean, there's no hints or anything to Mysterio coming back in No Way Home, but I'm under the firm belief that I think Mysterio is still alive. And the whole fake death thing seems a bit pointless when you realise that 10 minutes into No Way Home it didn't really matter. All that was there to establish in doing that was the fact that Mysterio reveals Peter's identity. Well, and public outrage, which the extended scene I feel would have done much better than the one we got in the film. But moving on to a bunch of filler content that basically establishes that Peter's having a hard time and he can't get into MIT, which seems to be a bigger problem than killing Mysterio, but hey, enough about that rant. And thankfully this is where the film starts to do a U-turn and actually get really good. Peter goes to visit Doctor Strange, and as you know from the trailers, we all know that he does the spell, and this scene plays out fantastically. Tom Holland and Benedict Cumberbatch know how to play off each other very well during these scenes. But from here we go to the famous bridge battle, which we really wanted to see in LEGO, but unfortunately that new poly bag just turns out to be the tower bridge fight. and not the bridge fight. Something I believe LEGO were fully aware about, purposely bamboozling us because I do feel like they've got something up their sleeve. But more on that in a bit. We get to the wonderful Doc Ock versus Iron Spider scene, which is a great fight sequence, and they both seem to be fighting each other out of pure confusion rather than ill intent, which leads to a very comedic scene underneath the bridge where, using the Iron Spider suit, Peter gains controls over Doc Ock's arms. Honestly, I think LEGO would be silly not to make sets on this film, and I also think that this is a prime candidate for giving us Doc Ock, Iron Spider, and Green Goblin again in a set. This one wouldn't even have to be that big, it would just have to be a tiny bit of bridge with the 3 minifigures. This could be as cheap as £35 if they wanted it to be. However, I know we have an $100 set coming up, and I could see this being the bridge battle, but I would not like to have only 3 minifigures that were significant to the scene. I definitely want more, and I hope that LEGO would give us as many minifigures from this film as possible, but there's definitely an easier way to do that, which we'll talk about again later. And one thing I've not seen anybody else mention, which I really do love, in the attention to detail in this scene, we all know that Alfred Molina's Doc Ock, when the arms are in control, the centerpiece of the eye is red. When Otto Octavius is in control, they change back to a white, but nobody has noticed that when Peter's in control, the eyes change to a blue color. I don't know why. Spider-Man blue, I guess. A fun detail that I don't think anybody else has noticed. And might I say, considering that I believe 99% of this to all be CGI, including the de-aging effect on Alfred Molina, I believe all the de-aging effects in this film look really good. And from basically somebody who does similar things in terms of CGI, I'm usually quite good at spotting it when it's bad, and I must say that this is a vast improvement over other things that I've seen from other franchises. But moving on, Peter has now been tasked by Doctor Strange to capture the other related Spider-Man villains that have popped over to our universe, starting with Electro. Now, the Electro fight, in my opinion, is relatively good, even though, like most of these fight scenes, it's very short-lived. No real explanation was given why Electro went from a blue color back into Jamie Foxx, but I think this was actually purposely done as they make a joke about it later on in the film. But just a couple of things I want to say about this scene. Sandman, I don't understand why he's all sand for this film. As far as I'm aware, that's not how his powers worked in Spider-Man 3, and one simple line of just saying, hey, I'm stuck in sand form, could have fixed that whole situation for me. Maybe there was a line like that and I just missed it, but I'll look out for that line when I next go for a rewatch. I really like the CGI in this scene, and as much as the lightning effects have been terrible all over the posters, clearly the people doing it on the film have done a much better job at making it look realistic, and I love the fact that the black and gold suit is just the red and black suit inside out, which, by the way, I was totally correct on in my predictions video. And one thing I just want to bring up about the integrated suit, that is also the red and black suit, meaning the 3 sets we got from LEGO No Way Home, even though it's technically inspired from the other films, all of the 3 Spider-Man figures we got are all the same suit, which I just thought was an interesting tidbit of information. And again, I think this scene would be good to give us as a nice, cheaper set, but unfortunately I don't see that happening, as I'd much prefer Electro in his nicer suit with the arc reactor from the end of the film, but you never know, LEGO might be able to work with something here, just reusing that black and gold suit they gave us in the Vulture Wing set back in October. Then we get a scene with the Green Goblin, and I love this scene where he breaks the mask, and it reminisces the same shot type used from the Spider-Man scene where he leaves the mask at the dumpster, really trying to make the audience believe that when he's at Feast, he is Norman Osborn and not the Goblin in disguise. This scene would look great as a polybag, as it would be a nice small set of a dumpster and then an original Green Goblin minifigure with maybe arm printing and side leg printing to give us an updated version of that figure with a new helmet mold and all, before he gets his new look in the next scene. A polybag which I don't think is very likely if they're going to do some form of bridge battle scene though. Then we get the sequence with Doctor Strange and Spider-Man having a fight and him explaining that he doesn't really understand about the multiverse just yet. And then we get the money shot, the shots for all the trailers. And I like that this scene had a purpose, Doctor Strange trying to trap Spider-Man in the mirror dimension, but it backfiring on him, rather than just having a nice money shot for all of the trailers and not really doing anything with it. Also being able to include Doctor Strange, but not having him ex machina the ending of the film with wizard powers, and also giving Spider-Man's decisions more meaning in this film. And this leads right into a slowdown of pacing where Peter tries to quote-unquote fix all of the bad guys. I like that the bad guys in this film are so hesitant to follow Peter's word, and Electro even questioning it before Green Goblin. But right before we get to one of the best scenes in my opinion, something I was confused about in the film, and again I will look at it on my second viewing of this film, when Norman was operating the fabricator, did he make a vial of Green Goblin juice and that's what allowed the Goblin to come out in the next scene? Or was that the anti-serum that he was meant to get at the beginning, and Goblin just showed up before to Dafoe could get given the anti-serum. Let me know in the comment section below, as I genuinely didn't understand what I was looking at, whether I was looking at a vial of Green Goblin juice, or whether that was the antidote to the Green Goblin juice. I wasn't sure if it was a pacing issue or me just being dumb. I like that Doc Ock gets this redeeming moment where the inhibitor chip is fixed, and it's done very reminiscent of how the original Tobey Maguire Spider-Mans looked. The stylizing in this film is great, and that comes full circle into something we'll talk about at the end. Now, one of the best scenes in this whole film for me is the spider sense scene, and everybody knows what I'm talking about when I say that. Right before the showdown of Green Goblin getting discovered in the apartment, there is the scene of Spider-Man's spider sense activating, and I must say I think it's the best depiction of spider sense we've seen on screen, and really puts you in the shoes of Spider-Man really feeling that something is wrong with all the audio going into distilled wine, and his first reaction is telling May to get out of the room. Then we get to the best fight scene between Spider-Man and Green Goblin that I think I've seen. It beats Tobey's one hands down. And with every punch that Tom Holland throws at him, the smile just gets bigger and bigger on Norman's face. Another reason I actually think that taking away the mask from William Dafoe was a good decision rather than a bad one. And we get to the biggest moment throughout this film, which I believe is Aunt May's death and the introduction of the other Spider-Man. I was genuinely surprised when Aunt May died. I had no idea it was coming, and I'm thankful I stayed off YouTube because it was the first thing spoiled for me when I refreshed my page, because I'm sure a lot of other people were surprised at the fact that Aunt May died. I honestly believed if Tobey and Andrew were in this film that it was going to be Tobey that gave the "with great power comes great responsibility" line, or hell, I was expecting Robert Downey Jr. to show up in terms of like a hologram effect like he did in Endgame, to give a very similar speech that Aunt May does, showing that even dead, I'm the hero could be a more meaningful way of confirming those glasses were definitely for Peter in Far From Home, at the same time as giving him that iconic line. But the fact that Aunt May does it just means so much more. Tom Holland's acting is fantastic in the scene, and I'm really glad they didn't mess this line up and make it something really cringy and therefore so meaningless. And the fact that she then dies is incredible. I'm so surprised that Marvel had the balls to do that on screen, considering that the trope is usually Uncle Ben dies and he gives that same line. Now, we don't know what happens to Uncle Ben. For all we know, that could get brought up in the freshman year and he could have just died normally. And I think that would honestly make May's death a bit more impactful, because Aunt May is taking the spot of Uncle Ben in this scene. And if I'm honest, I'm really happy she nailed this scene and they pulled the direct quote out of the comic books. But moving on, this is the scene where the Tobey and Andrew Garfield cameo come in, confirming those films are technically MCU now, I guess? And Andrew Garfield once again nails this scene. He comes in first. I really like that there's still that Andrew Garfield sarcasm he gives with every line, but they've toned it down a fair bit so he's not as sarky as he was in The Amazing Spider-Man 1 or 2. Tobey Maguire gets introduced in the same way, and I would have liked Tobey Maguire to be introduced in a different way, as soon as Ned opened the portal, it was predictable to see Tobey Maguire there as well, and I would have loved to see him introduced in a different way to Andrew Garfield instead of the same portal trick. The rest of the film is basically pure fan service, and that's not necessarily a bad term. There's good fan service and there's bad fan service. This definitely leans more towards the good fan service side of things. We have the lab scene where they all point at each other, we have the back jokes, and them all teaming up at the end to fight the bad guys. Another problem I had though was I'd love to see a bit more time with these villains, similar to how we saw William Dafoe chat with the Goblin Mask before he went into Feast. I would have loved to see how Electro used that arc reactor to basically build himself his new suit and just give a bit more character development to him, as I really believe this Electro is miles better than the one that we saw in Amazing Spider-Man 2, and I'd love him to come up if they were ever going to do an Amazing Spider-Man 3 with this new attitude. Granted, I wouldn't want him to be the main bad guy, but definitely a cameo would be very good. One thing, again, I kind of didn't like about this film, but it was executed very well, which was all these enemies were relatively easy to fight for all three Spider-Men, but then again, it would be. They're all three Spider-Men, two of them being very experienced with these types of villains before. I don't know, maybe I just wanted the fight scene to last a bit longer. I don't know, I just felt like some of these incarnations had bigger stakes in their own films, and I don't even really remember Sandman's motivation to even working with these bad guys. As soon as he saw Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man, he should have just been like, yo, we cool, right? Which is what he did at the beginning of the film. I don't know, maybe he just didn't see that there were three Spider-Men. I would have much rather Sandman would have helped them, similar to how Doc Ock does with Electro at the end. But I'm glad Green Goblin almost was the main enemy towards the end, with the shield crashing down, blowing up the box, which means the spell got out, which means Doctor Strange is going to be distracted with the spell, meaning it's up to Peter Parker to really do the main fighting in this scene. And the fact that Tom Holland doesn't really hold back until Tobey Maguire gets in the way truly does show that with great power does come great responsibility, and not to repeat Tobey's same mistakes that he made during his run as Spider-Man. And you can really see this lesson being told through just their eye contact. It doesn't need to be explained, and overall is a fantastic scene. One that clearly meant a lot for Peter because his ending spell that makes everybody forget who he is really does mean a lot for the Spider-Man character, and actually is the same thing that happens at the end of One More Day, the comic that this film is based on. Well, at least a similar situation. And the scene of him buying coffee with MJ, and him making that decision that his friends are actually better off without him, really does mean a lot, and Tom Holland portrays that decision again beautifully through just his eyes alone. And the end scene with Peter Parker getting himself an apartment, which may or may not be the next Mock series, hint hint, really just goes to show that this character has matured over the last 3 films, and him going out in his brand new Spider-Man outfit, inspired from other people's outfit, which again I do believe to be a modified version of the red and black suit, showing that even his suit has evolved throughout this film, and the film ends with him swinging through New York City as your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man in a very similar location to the end of Hawkeye. I would love to see these two cross over in the final episode of Hawkeye, but I don't think it'll happen. I just want more on-screen time of this new suit. I think the metallic blue looks really, really nice, and can't wait for LEGO to mess this figure up entirely. And that leads me on to my final point. I don't understand what LEGO's going to do in this situation. I think it's likely that we'll see most, if not all, of the figures represented in No Way Home sets coming up in the future. I think we're going to get updated versions of the Andrew Garfield suit and the Tobey Maguire suit, which is going to be odd because the only time they've released those for Tobey Maguire was 2004 to 2006 time, and Andrew Garfield has only ever had one figure, and that was a Comic-Con exclusive, which they're now going to have to remake as that's that same suit. So they're going to have to make that figure very different, if not better than the Comic-Con one, so owners of that Comic-Con figure don't feel like it'll go down in value too much. But then LEGO have stated that they don't really care about aftermarket value, so they might just go ahead and re-release a very similar looking figure. I don't think it'll be exactly the same. I think that we're going to get dual molded legs and printed arms, but it wouldn't surprise me if the head and the torso are the same, if not very similar. Also, we know the symbiote suit is coming because the symbiote was left behind by Tom Hardy at the end credit scene of this film. Another figure that LEGO has only ever made in a Comic-Con exclusive, which I'm very happy to be getting these figures again, but they definitely need to make some decisions, as I feel like those owners of those figures are going to complain if it's similar looking to the ones they got back in Comic-Con, but needed updates in my opinion. We know of at least 2 sets that are kind of big price brackets that are going to be superhero sets, one being $100, one being $500. I would love to see a $100 bridge battle and a $500 Statue of Liberty fight, but I think there's going to be a lot more sets in between there. I think it would be silly for LEGO not to do this, and when I think we'll see them is probably around the March time, as I don't believe LEGO would have seen other concept art for this film, same as other toy companies, so I reckon they're probably seeing this at the same time as everyone else and then fast-tracking sets into production, which means we'll start probably seeing No Way Home sets again in March and beyond. Sets that, don't worry, I will be posting on this channel, as a lot of the content for the first half of next year will be Spider-Man based, but more on that in a future video. I'd love to hear about what you guys thought of this film in the comment section below. I'm not sure where it ranks in my top 10, I'll have to see the film 2 or 3 more times before I make that judgment. All I know from first reaction that it's definitely up there, and I can't wait to see more from Tom Holland or even potentially Andrew Garfield or Tobey Maguire in future Spider-Man projects. If you want to see a small mock I made about Spider-Man as we're going through the MCU Spider-Man films building mocks right now, click the screen. It's a 6-part multi-part series in one video, as it's a nice small mock. I'm sure you guys will love it, so click the screen if you want to see that. I'll see you guys in the next one.